Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Built in Ohio, the Ohio X podcast, where we're talking with and about the people, companies, and ideas building our state's tech hub. Today, we are welcomed by Anthony Joy, who is the CIO of Cleveland Metroparks. And Anthony, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for joining, and thanks for being a great Ohio X partner more broadly. Where are we talking to you from today?
We are actually in my office at Cleveland Metroparks, which actually is near the Cleveland Metroparks Zoo. So we have the gorillas, maybe a quarter of a mile behind me somewhere. So.
Nice. Well, when you want to, stretch your legs or do like a walk and talk meeting, you all at Metroparks have it a little bit more fun than most of us, where you can go check out the gorillas or the giraffes or whatever.
That is the nice thing working at the admin building. We can do our daily walks at the zoo, but you better know your animals because you'll get asked by people.
yeah. Don't wear your staff badges or anything.
No.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for joining. CIO of the Metroparks, which may be a good place to start, is just all that encompasses, because even in just your type, Cleveland Metroparks, but you have the zoo under your purview. It is an incredibly large organization, both geographically, but also just in the scope of what you're all doing, from zoos to golf courses to parks to a bunch of other stuff, police forces. Could you just talk a little bit about that, of just all that, the Metroparks does in general and what you're seeing from a technology perspective?
Yeah, 100%. I think even when I applied for the Metroparks, I don't think I knew the scope. When somebody's like, hey, you should apply here. And I was like, the Metroparks? Like, really? But once I started seeing how much they did, even though I lived in the Cleveland area, it was crazy, because a lot of people think we're just in one county, but we're actually in 6 different counties, right? So 6 different counties across Northeast Ohio, and then 9 golf courses, the zoo, 100-person police force. We have, concession stands, restaurants, marinas, and then we have our educational teams, veterinarian teams, or, we have a zoo vet hospital. And then, of course, everything we do with drones and GIS and virtual reality. So we're in so many different business verticals. It's really exciting, because you get to see how each business vertical works throughout the day. But I mean, frankly, what we're saying is the same. There's still some analysis and whatnot in all the business verticals, right? Which is data analysis and trying to get as much data as we can, and clean data usage, and trying to improve efficiency of all of our resources. Now, granted, some of those efficiencies are different in each business vertical, but sometimes what we try to do is, in the ITS department, is try to say, oh, we found 3, let's go, this could hit 3 business verticals, let's hit this project. Or, okay, now we found 2 that hits 2, and try to find some synergies between all those areas.
And what was that like? Because as you mentioned, as you're getting on board and starting to join the Metroparks and learning about the opportunity to run the tech there, of just discovering all that, but then being like, oh, geez, I have to do everything from the police department to the vets that are doing surgeries on animals to, restaurants, and they have their whole, everything from, the restaurant business. That's an incredibly diverse, as you said, verticals, and just everything, going on, and that you all are doing each and every day, and all the technology that enables it. What was that like in those early days, kind of grasping it all, figuring it out, and then, you probably don't want to necessarily just do tech, when you can, obviously, right. I don't know, police officers need some of the same technology that your zookeepers need, but like data and analytics, perfect example, as you just mentioned, that's across the board. And so what was that kind of evolution like? And now that you've, been into the job, how has that kind of maybe shifted over time?
Yeah, I'd say once I first started, it was a little overwhelming. I'd sit with the zoo and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I could take my entire staff and we could work in zoo projects for the entire year. And then I met with golf, and they're talking about like drone deliveries and ball drops, and then with the police, with all the security requirements. So the big thing is, when I started, we is really building up the team, right? What team do we have? But at the same point, like we do in everything else, is the collaboration between everybody that we're doing, right? And I don't just mean collaboration with the agency. I'm talking about within other agencies and cities, across Northeast Ohio and Ohio, because there's no point in me reinventing the wheel. At the same point, sometimes we do have to reinvent the wheel because we are in so many different areas. But when I started, it was, overwhelming. I would give great credit to our CEO, because Brian Zimmerman, because when he came aboard, I'm the first CIO of the Metroparks, because he understood the need and use of technology. So when I came aboard, there was actually a USB courier where they had to transfer files. They put it on a USB drive and moved it from a different site. And that was acceptable at the time. But so we came in and we're like, okay, we have to connect all these buildings, connect all these sites, and really build up the infrastructure so we could start doing the cool things like IoT or VR and AR and all these AI projects that we're hitting now. So right now, it doesn't necessarily seem nearly as overwhelming as it did when I started. Certainly it does, because there's something different every week, whether it comes to an underwater drone or a dam that we're building and that we need a new piece of technology for, how these cameras work. And so it's not to say that we still don't have that, but we have a nice tech committee that we have everyone from each of our business areas that we're all on one centralized committee, and we talk about sort of the major needs of everybody that we have for the organization, and we try to find those different areas and kind of move along with whether it's a work order management system that everyone's been struggling with, or the IoTs are a perfect example, because once we started that project, then everybody had different ideas about security and analysis and analytics and natural resources. So we kind of let that flow depending on where we are, and then of course rely on our partners to help with the rest.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned the internal processes of all the different stakeholders and across those different business verticals, but thinking of, and I spent time in the public sector and got to work on some technology projects that were really fun and rewarding. But for example, I was at the treasurer's office, and so you had 49 other treasurer's offices at a basic level to look at. It's a pretty easy one-to-one. But with what you're doing, what are you? I assume you can talk to zoos, you can talk to police departments, and there's just so much even in the public sector and the variety of all that. How do you go as the leader and the CIO leading the technology there? How do you go about kind of sourcing outside for the ideas and the inspiration, just because you could pull from so many different places, which, does that become a paralysis or analysis by paralysis, or however that phrase goes. But,
Right.
What's that like for you? How do you navigate kind of that outside ideation and inspiration?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say it still all comes down to how willing, our collaborators are. So in the park district space, there's obviously thousands of park districts across the nation, but not many our size. And then once you take our size, which we're class 1 defined by NRPA, which we did win the gold medal for best park district in the nation in 2021. So we're very proud of that. But even when we take our big park districts, now how many of those big park districts have a zoo? And then that shrinks. And then how many are near a lake? And then that shrinks again. So there's not a lot of people or organizations that match ours. There are probably 5 that we work with that are large. For example, I meet with a person out of Maryland, in Maryland, one of their park districts there, Leonard, great guy. And we actually have a meeting every Friday morning, 9 to 9:30, and kind of go over different things that are happening in our industry. They're about the same size. Once again, he doesn't have a zoo. He has a lot of rec centers, so we don't have rec centers, but those are good synergies. And then, of course, you're right, police departments. There's police departments all over. No need to necessarily reinvent the wheel there. So we talk with other police departments and see what they're doing. And then, of course, zoos, they're under AZA, which is part of the a zoo consortium. And then from there, we work with a lot of our local zoos, even Columbus. We're strategic partners in a lot of places with zoos, so we're not necessarily competitors for the most part. So I visited Columbus Zoo. Our executive director, Chris Kuhar, he works with other zoos in the area. He's on the AZA board, so he puts us in touch with people. So it's very collaborative, which I love, because we get to work with all those different people. And then, of course, the city governments, are also equally helpful. I mean, we have Doug, from in Columbus, and then some of the other, the Hilliard City Lab.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing what they're doing, and Ohio X has been a huge portion of that, to see how other governments are doing like test labs.
Yep.
So we may not necessarily have that opportunity to do a test lab, but now we could work with them in order to try to find those ideas or what new projects we may be working on, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So,
it's great. And, you mentioned started to get into some of the technologies, and I'd love to talk about and learn a little bit more on some of the stuff, whether it's IoT. You mentioned things like the drones and the data and analytics and sensors. Certainly AI is something everyone's talking about, but something like an IoT, for instance, that you're working in. You mentioned that earlier.
Mhm.
How do you think about those technologies that are emerging? How what are some of the stuff that you're actively deploying now, and where are you looking to take it, do you think, in the future?
Yeah. So now we've always had IoT in one way or another.
Yep.
And frankly, there's a lot of great companies that offer a lot of great products, right? And I think one of the differences in how we look at things is scope, right? So I'll give you an example of like a trail counters, where we're counting like people and cars, right? Those exist. Great company out of Canada that sells them, but they're expensive. They're almost like $4,500 a piece.
Wow.
With a cellular connection. Now, if we were to do that for the entire park district, that's $500,000 million a year. And then those costs will increase. So we need to also make technology scalable, right? So anything we do, we can't just buy the tech as it works. We have to buy tech that's also scalable at cost, right? We can't just increase prices whenever we want to pay for all these trail counters. So what we've been doing is always listening to ideas with our partners. So the Water Alliance actually started installing low RAN gateways across the lake to make a smart lake. And we heard of this technology and we're like, this is great, which is like low bandwidth. You can't like transmit video or data over it, but just ones and zeros. So like, is something flooding? Is this on or is this off? You can send temperature, humidity, all these other sensors. And then once we started that, it's always that chicken and the egg thing, because once we brought it up to our team, we're like, hey, we have these sensors we could put out. And they're like, well, what can the sensors do? And I'm like, well, what do you want the sensors to do? They're like, I don't know. Tell me what the sensors can do. And so we're always trying to figure out this, what comes first. So we started doing like temp and humidity, right? Which is easy, because across you have 9 golf courses. The weather in Lake County is not going to be the same as the weather in Hinckley. Those are miles and miles apart. So, but in addition to that, then we start looking at water level qualities, because there's these water level sensors in case something were to flood. Like sometimes our zoo's near a river, and sometimes that the excessive rainfall floods a lower portion of the zoo. And some of those sensors just weren't quick enough, even though they were cellular. They only sent out once every hour or something like that. And that time it was too late. So now our new sensors, we're measuring, you put it up high and it's measuring the water distance. And then we're able to send that out initially right off the bat. Same thing with mountain bike trails. We're doing a pilot with this because right now somebody actually has to go out on the mountain bike trails and say, oh, this is too damp, or this is too, so we have to close the mountain bike trails. Well, let's put sensors out there, right? And let's have that do an analysis and tell us what those trails are doing. So, and then we also have things for like leak detection. And then of course, people counting. A lot of the things is like how our trails are being used. A lot of other parks have like one main entrance and exit, and our parks aren't built like that, especially if you go through Rocky River. There's roads intersecting other roads, and you can jump on a trail at any point in time. So to try to get people counters and like how many pedestrians and bikes and people with dogs are running, trying to get all that data, we can start putting these sensors where it just breaks a beam or actually has a small camera and uses a thermal analysis. Now, we're not seeing that image on our end, but what the camera is doing is it's actually taking sort of a snapshot and saying, oh, the AI detects that's the person, so it sends one person, or this is one horse, or this is two bikes, and then it's able to transmit all that data. So once we started this IoT piece, a lot of our projects always spiral, where it's like we have one or two ideas and then they get to 3 or 4 and 5 or 6. So now we have like in the hopper, 10 or 12 different types of sensors where we're trying to install and try out.
So you mentioned kind of the sourcing of ideas from colleague organizations, whether it's another Metro Parks in Maryland or local police department. But I'm sure you can still get a ton of ideas. And as you're just running through a bunch of these examples, sensor technology, a bunch of IoT technology, drone technology, the data and analytics, kind of more of the software type back end stuff. How do you then, take the 100 different ideas that you could do? Because again, you have all these different business verticals within the Metro Parks. And then how do you figure out the ones you want to either pilot or kind of go all in on, like just as a leader or a team more broadly? Like, what's that process like? Because I'm sure there's just so much you wish you could do and want to do, but you can't spend all day just testing out a million different, pieces of drone technology or whatever it might be.
Right. So, so we kind of do that in a couple of different ways. One is obviously we have a listing of all of our projects, and you're 100% right. Like we have a whole list of AI projects that people want to start with us, whether it's using Copilot Studio or ChatGPT or all these other areas. And I'd love to just sit down and start doing all of them, but we can't, right? So we do use a couple different methods in how we do that. One is when we usually do projects at the beginning of the year when we start planning, we try to make sure we're trying to keep everything sort of even keel, meaning that there'll be at least one customer-facing improvement for like 2026. In addition to one customer-facing improvement, we'll want to make one infrastructure improvement, and then something we want to test out that we're going to do. So with the AI piece or IoT, whatever it may be, a lot of those items we look at and we determine, okay, well, how many people could this help, right? How many different areas can it help? And then if it's a lot, then we'll go down that path. However, even with that being said, there could still be a critical piece like gun detection on cameras is big. So even though that may only help the police, that's still a public safety piece that we want to, move forward to the next level. And then of course, depending on some of our projects, we're always doing some types of construction or new building. So like we have our sailing center that we're being built. We have our primate forest, the zoo. So a lot of times with that, it's okay, what technology are we going to supplement with in those particular buildings, right? So resources get diverted there. At other times, if we have time and a little bit of resources, we make it a little competition, especially in our IT department, where we actually had this area. So we're part of NRPA, which is a National Recreation Parks Association. And what we do is we have to do these like lengthy documents where we have to submit all this information about our parks and how we function. And we're trying to find out a better way to do that. So as far as like, what pieces are we missing? What things can we add? What things are, too much data, too little data? So we actually took two of our IT people who are very adept in AI. We're like, look, like whoever gets to it first wins. So one used ChatGPT, one used Copilot. They each were prompting in their own different ways. At the end of the thing, we're like, give me your reports. And each one kind of gave us how they did. And we turned that into a little competition. So sometimes we do that internally. And then, so that's one great thing that we do with the IoT piece. We're already kind of relying on the water lines to do some of the heavy lifting. So once they sort of got it out there, they helped us, get ours up and started. Same thing with like, the Hilliard City Lab and Dwayne Powell, the work he does. Like he's working on some cool stuff. Well, like, okay, if I can jump off of when he gets to this level, it's going to be a lot easier for me, to move to that particular. Yeah. So I won't say there's a right or wrong way. Obviously, sometimes it's by priority, but we each way is a little different. But.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love you mentioned, people like Dwayne and Doug and others that, are also leaders in this, in the government and public sector space of technology. Because, have someone who's also worked there. there's also there's 100% a perception amongst citizens and taxpayers like, well, if I can get this on Netflix like this, or if I could get Amazon delivery in a day, like, why
Right.
can't I get the same from public sector? It's like,
Right.
well, the funding's a little bit different between
Right.
the two, but that said, it's been really fun. And I think Ohio, because of folks like you and what Metroparks is doing in particular, there's a real neat GovTech leadership that is here. And, there's been a lot of state leadership around some of these topics, but
Mhm.
more and more it's local governments and municipalities. You mentioned what you're doing in Cleveland, some of the Central Ohio communities, and there's a few others, but this is really good stuff, and it's really important because this is stuff that touches everyone. And
Right.
you brought a group of Ohio X folks to the Metroparks a
Mhm.
few weeks ago, and as we were talking with people about it, it was like everyone in northeastern Ohio was like, oh, I go with my kids all the time, and I've been 3 times this year, but they had never seen the tech side, so that was cool on
Right.
that. But just the daily, whether it's a city or a Metroparks, it just touches everyone. And so it's really cool to just see that collaboration and kind of what you all are building, and then helping each other kind of through that process of like, oh, if City Lab is doing this, like, we can learn from them, and we don't have to start in inning 1. We can pick up in inning 5 and
Right.
see what the pitch count was like in the first 5 innings. So yeah, that's awesome. For tech companies, especially because we're seeing more and more, it seems like interest from whether
Mhm.
it's startups or tech companies that do want to do stuff in government because of the need. What would be a message to them of working with folks like you? Because again, there are different realities. There's
Mhm.
budget, processes, cycles, considerations, whether it's levies, this or that. What would be a kind of a message or a tip you'd like to leave for folks that are building for maybe solutions in the public sector or considering it?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've worked with a lot of good startups, and working with local governments, and I know you've worked in local government, trying to work with, sometimes the amount of paperwork to work with a government agency can be daunting, right? So, but at the same point, we've found a good way for agencies to do just that. Whether we do like RFPs or work directly with partners and vendors, we continue to do them. So like we're working with an AI project with the zoo, and most of these are all startup companies, right? So we have methods to let them know, like, hey, here's the state resources you need to go to get on these state term contracts, and which is different than just registering with the state, but to do business with a local government or entity. At the same point, there's some agencies in Northeast Ohio that are really good about assisting those companies to get into the public sector. So we always say, like, if you have an idea, don't necessarily get nervous about working with the public sector. You can still approach us, and we certainly have ways to direct you to an organization that can help you, or at least give you those resources in order to do it. Because it really, at the end of the day, it's really about efficiency. And if you could prove efficiency, that's going to be the number one thing that gets you into the door.
Yeah.
And as long as we can prove that and show that, that's going to be the biggest selling point. And then everything else is just easy.
Yep.
So it's really, in your Ohio X events have been great, because we have met some of those individuals who are like, oh, I have an idea, or they had an idea about like medical devices. We're like, hey, can you do this on an animal? They're like, we've never had that question before, but at the same point, they're like, hey, we're certainly willing to discuss it. And they have. And we've worked with a lot of these companies in the past and hope to do so in the future. So
that's great. One other area is we're kind of rounding out kind of the CIO aspect of this conversation, but cybersecurity. Your work, again, just all the different verticals and from restaurants to zoo memberships to passes and this and that. Like, you're overseeing so much in cybersecurity for especially not necessarily just public sector, but any organization that has a very kind of high, digital footprint of just awareness and people know that you're out there. What's that been like navigating in, especially in this age of AI, and we're seeing more and more, whether it's deep fakes or just AI, automated, kind of cyber threats out there. How has that been? How are you thinking about that?
Yeah. So once again, we have a pretty robust cybersecurity program that we're glad to have. We do work with partners in Ohio, many of which are on Ohio X to secure our network. But for the most part, we're glad that we have the resources from our administration. Our CEO brings it up at our staff meetings, meaning that like don't click on phishing links, and like cybersecurity are huge things. So I'm very fortunate that we have an organization and administration that is very cyber aware. And so that makes my job a little easier, frankly, because once you start hearing it from the top down, then it's much easier to implement those policies. Now, at the same point, every time we release a new cybersecurity component, it's hard because a lot of people think, oh, you're making my job a little harder because now I have to do an MFA prompt or do something like that. So we have this very robust onboarding process for all of our new employees, and during that, it's held once a month. And then during that process, actually, I meet with all the employees and we go over some of the IT things they need to know, but I spend a great portion on the cybersecurity piece. Like, don't click on these phishing emails, and this is what it looks like. And I always tell them, I'm like, hey, this is going to happen. You're going to get a phishing email. One, somebody's going to send it. Two, we're going to test you on it, right? So you're going to get it in your inbox whether you like it or not, unfortunately. At the same point, we've implemented some cool programs called guardrails, because at the same point, when we kind of copy this from some other agencies where they necessarily isn't robust, but they gave us the idea where, because if you clicked on like 3 phishing attempts, they were terminating people. And they're like, well, this is going to be rough because now we're getting rid of a lot of good employees. So they started sending them to after 2 attempts or 3 attempts, they send them to a program where they essentially made them 1985 emails. So you couldn't click on links. There was no images. Every time you replied, it gave you boxes. You had to click and highlight. So that's what we started doing. So we created a guardrails program where in case you clicked on 2 phishing links, you go into this program where you kind of get sent back to 1985 email. You can only access email on one device. It's not a fun process, but it's when somebody goes on guardrails, we've had a 95% success rate that nobody ever clicks on a phishing link again because it was so painful after that. At the same point, that's kind of the stick. We also have a carrot where we're like, let's put people into a raffle, and then we'll give them a free day off if you haven't clicked on any phishing tests throughout the year. So we try to hit it both ways. We have the stick, but we prefer the carrot and give people good rewards and rankings when they report phishing emails and attempts. But not that it's just related to phishing, but protecting all that data is essential because we have so many different types of data. Some of our marketing lists actually went to the Ohio Supreme Court, and that's technically a trade secret. So once that became actually a trade secret, now we have to work with our marketing team to make sure, how do we protect that data? Who has access to that data? And with all of our data loss prevention pieces that are in place, it's still constantly a struggle. I mean, every organization could probably hire 5 more cybersecurity people to secure the organization. But once again, it's working with partners and trying to see where the low-hanging fruit is and trying to stop any major attacks.
Yeah, I love the creativity behind it because as much as all the cyber stuff, and again, AI is just advancing the threats, incredibly. It really comes back down to human people, and how we're clicking on stuff and just general awareness. But, you mentioned 1985 emails. Sometimes that kind of seems nice, and, getting back to a flip phone or something. And
some people maybe didn't want to go off of guardrails. Maybe.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I'm, on the road for travel this week, and I'll call you when I get to the hotel tomorrow night. So, but Anthony, have loved this part of the conversation, but as we're kind of rounding home here, ask you some of our quick rapid fire questions that we ask all our guests. And so it's great to get perspectives of a CIO from Cleveland, or, an exec in Cincinnati, or a researcher in Columbus or something. But so the first one is, what's a challenge that you're currently working to solve? So it could be big, small, something really technical, or something with kind of a management leadership focus, but what's a challenge that you are working to solve?
I think right now it's seeing how the staffing industry is going. As far as in IT, a lot, you always see these huge shifts where it's data analytics, like, oh my gosh, you don't have enough data analytics people, and we need to hire them. And then there's this, shrinking the workforce where we have difficulty finding somebody. And then it was like web developers for a while. And then now web developers, now we could get a web developer pretty easily. But before we couldn't. And then now it's AI folks or cybersecurity. So it's always trying to see where that shift is. Even like system, like just basic stuff like system administration. There's not many people going into that field because maybe it's not as enticing, right, as AI or cybersecurity. So some of the behind the scenes things were like, oh, I'm just setting up servers or network switches. Not many people are going into those fields. So for me, it's always difficult where people are going, because even as a government agency, I'm most likely going to be a little behind in that, because the corporate world is going to pick those people up faster, give them larger salaries before I can catch up and maybe reorganize. So trying to figure out where staffing is going is always is going to be difficult, has always been a challenge. Right now, it seems data analytics and cyber and sort of the AI pieces are in high demand.
Yeah, that's great. Second question: what's a favorite read, listen, or a watch? So it's a book, podcast, or show, and it can be, again, work related or something that you use to clock off with at the end of the night.
Yeah, so I am kind of I actually, every time I go to Columbus, I listen to a different podcast purposely. But I'd say probably the show I last watched was probably Squid Games, just because I had to see how that ended. But any sci-fi show I'll probably watch, whether it's on Netflix or whatnot. Big Stranger Things fan, so excited for that new series to come out. Yeah,
very cool. All right, so say someone's coming to visit Cleveland, maybe a new hire you're recruiting, or your colleague from Maryland, you guys are doing kind of a working session, and you invited them to Cleveland or something like that. But where are you taking them? Coffee, lunch, dinner? Obviously we'll take the zoo and the Metroparks and your golf courses and your marinas off the table for now.
Okay.
That's an obvious, but the coffee shops, restaurants, lunch places, dinner places, where would you take someone coming into town?
Yeah, I'd probably go to Little Italy. There's a couple of good places down there, Mama Santos or whatnot. I probably would really take them to Merwin's Wharf. I know that's a Cleveland Metroparks restaurant, but it's right along the lakefront. Delicious pretzel. So probably still would take them there first. But
yeah, well, I mean, it's something that you all can do that we can't in Columbus, and a lot of you can't lean into the water like Cleveland can.
Yeah,
so
right.
You might as well.
Might as well use the water.
Exactly. So final one is, how are you spending a perfect Saturday? What's it look like? No work can be involved, but from when you get up to go to bed, what's a perfect Saturday look like for you?
I think it's doing something with my family, kids. We always try to do something different. So we're not like, oh, camp would be perfect camping or whatnot. So I think it's just spending time with the kids. A lot of times we go to their sporting events right now. But at the end of the day, I always like a good trail run. So I'm a runner, so running through the woods by myself with no phone or technology. I do have my watch, but I don't have LTE on it, so I could relax for a couple miles and enjoy that. So
I like that. That's a good 1985 style disconnect of getting away for a little bit to reset everything. But Anthony, have really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for, again, all you're doing with the Metroparks and getting involved and helping make the OhioX work and mission of building Ohio into a tech hub possible. We'll put your LinkedIn in the show notes for folks if they want to scroll down, connect, and follow what you're up to. Also, the Cleveland Metroparks URL to check it out and all that's going on there. But any final comments for folks before we hop off for this time?
I just say thank you for your time, and thank you, Chris, for what you're doing for OhioX. We met a lot of great people through a lot of the events, and look forward to the future. So I think Ohio, like you said, is rife with a lot of creativity and efficiencies, and can't wait to really hit the road going. So.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Anthony. And thanks everyone for listening and watching. Appreciate you tuning in. We'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.